Welcome, everybody, to another edition of One Question for Every Fight here on the SevereMMA YouTube page. I am Spencer Kyte, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man. And today we are looking at UFC Las Vegas, is what I've taken to calling it, because it's not at the Apex, so it doesn't feel like it should be in that UFC Vegas 71 nomenclature. Calling it UFC at the theater, which is where it's at, the theater at Virgin Hotels, formerly the Joint at the Hard Rock Hotel, feels really clunky. So I'm just going UFC and then the location, which is Las Vegas, a 14 fight card headlined by a critical bantamweight matchup between Petr Yan and Merab Dvalishvili, featuring the rebooked, sort of pushed back light heavyweight former main event from a couple weeks ago between Nikita Krylov and Ryan Spann, and a bunch of other interesting fights, 5 bantamweight matchups, which makes this a really fascinating card for me and something I'm certainly interested in as a result of that division being on display. And so we're going to get right into it with the main event. As I said, former champion Petr Yan, Merab Dvalishvili. And my question is simply, can Petr Yan keep Merab Dvalishvili off of him long enough to be effective? We saw in Merab's last fight against Jose Aldo that even if he doesn't get the takedowns, and he was 0 for 16 in terms of takedowns, his pressure, his pace, and his relentlessness can be enough to create a situation where the few strikes he lands and the even ineffectiveness of his grappling becomes enough for him to win fights, because the opposition has to just be defensively minded the whole time. Jose Aldo wasn't able to land a whole lot of anything because he had a giant wet blanket strapped to him the whole time. And Merab was able to control him on the fence, force him to defend takedowns. And when you're defending takedowns, you're not getting off offense of your own. Certainly, Petr Yan and Jose Aldo are in very different stages of their careers, have very different approaches. I would say that Petr Yan has a good get-up game, but I also think that this could be one of those situations where the relentlessness of Merab and now getting 25 minutes to work and the pace of him can be a real challenge for Petr Yan, who tends to start slow, who is usually a guy in these 5-round fights that builds into it, that comes on in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th after he's made his reads and gotten a sense of things. Against Merab, if you go down 5 minutes, if you go down 2 rounds, that could be 4, 5, 6, 7 takedowns, and you're starting to really tax that gas tank. And Petr Yan has not had an issue with conditioning through this point of his UFC career, so I'm not implying that, I'm not suggesting that. But it's simply a matter of, can he be effective in space and maintain that space before Merab is able to get in on his hips and get into situations, even where he's forcing Yan to grapple, forcing him to be defensive, forcing him to stuff takedowns, circle out and not fire off his weapons, whatever it may be. Because that's the thing, that's the hitch with fighting a guy like Merab, is that it's not necessarily that he's going to do so much damage to you in different spots. Now, that being said, we've seen him do damage, right? Finished Marlon Moraes, beat the hell out of Marlon Moraes after getting hurt. And we've seen him ragdoll guys around the cage, and that certainly piles up impact at some point. But against Aldo, and I think against Yan this coming weekend, it'll be more about him being effective at neutralizing his opponent, because he just puts you in a defensive mindset. He puts you in a defensive shell where you have to just think about what he's going to do. Obviously, Petr Yan and his team know the wrestling is coming, the grappling is coming, and they will have prepared for that element. But prepare or not, it's a question of, can you do enough in those moments when he's not on you? Because I can tell you that within the first, I'm going to say 45 seconds, Merab's going to be trying for a takedown. It's probably 30 seconds. He's going to be trying for a takedown. And that means he's on your waist, he's on a leg, he's around your hips, like he's searching. And every time you have to defend is time that you're, generally speaking, not landing effective offense of your own. And that's the name of the game. And so if Merab creates clinch situations where he's landing little shots in tight, where he's landing those knees, where he's stomping the feet, where he's landing little short elbows in close, or even little pity pat punches that don't do a lot of damage, they become the accumulation where the other guy isn't doing much either. And so Merab gets ahead. It's a really fascinating fight to me because I think there's a path to me where Petr Yan just wins this fight going away, right? He comes out of the gates quickly, gets into his offense, is able to box up Merab, move well, get out of the way, chop at the leg a little bit, do some very good things, scramble up more effectively than he did against Aljo in the first couple rounds of their second fight, or even their first fight for that matter, and have more sustained success to where Merab is the one that's stuck being ineffective and shooting from a great distance and not panic wrestling, but being hurried in his approach. But I can also see a fight where Merab takes this guy down 10 times and just grinds this out and wins 3-2 on the scorecards, or wins 4-1 in a really close, kind of grimy, gritty, as I said in a couple pieces that I've written this week, not particularly aesthetically pleasing, but effective manner. And so I'm fascinated to see what Petr Yan does on Saturday, especially out of the gates, because as I said earlier, traditionally been a bit of a slow starter, and Merab's going to be in looking for that first takedown, certainly inside of the first minute. So I want to see how Petr Yan deals with it. Second fight of the night, co-main event, Alexander Volkov versus Alexander Romanov. And my question is, how did this one come together? So this one, from the time it was announced, has been a head scratcher to me, because you have Volkov coming off one of his best performances of late in the UFC, a first round TKO win over Jairzinho Rozenstruik, where he was more effective and he was more active and aggressive right out of the gate to come out and get that finish. Whereas Romanov is coming off his first loss, had a okay first round against Marcin Tybura, but then tired and was out wrestled, was out grappled, was just overall dominated in the second and third rounds of that fight. And so to me, the pairing of these two guys at this time feels just odd to me, because while the upside is Volkov gets a second straight win, maybe he gets a second straight finish, and now we've kind of rebuilt him a little bit into clearly the gatekeeper to the upper echelon in the division, sort of replacing Derek Lewis. The downside is that Romanov gets a win and bounces back by beating Volkov, but then he already feels a little bit capped because he's lost to Tybura, and it just creates more of that sameness in the middle of the division. It's certainly a tough spot because Alexander Volkov has fought just about everybody in the division. There's not many names in that top 10 that he hasn't shared the octagon with already. And so you're limited in terms of who you can put him in there with. For instance, he's already fought Marcin Tybura and beaten him. And so there's limited options. For me, and I said this after this gentleman's last win, this is where Jailton Almeida should be. This should be Alexander Volkov versus Jailton Almeida to me. And Almeida is booked against Rozenstruik. That's coming up, and it's an okay fight, but I would rather see him against a guy that's coming off a win. See him against a guy that has sort of beaten that, for the most part, that middle tier, and only struggled against the upper tier. Because it's high time that we figure out where Jailton Almeida is in this division as well. The win over Shamil Abdurrahimov a couple of weeks ago told us to a certain level where he's at. Beating Biggie Boy in a couple of weeks' time, or a couple months' time, sure, it's a top 10 win. It's going to move you forward, but it doesn't carry the same weight to me as beating Alexander Volkov would. Whereas if you're Volkov as well, go out and stop this guy that's on a great run and his sort of ascent, that's a much better win to me. Third fight on the main card is in the light heavyweight division. It is the former main event from a couple weeks ago, Nikita Krylov versus Ryan Spann. And my question is just who will be more impacted by the delay? This is really fascinating because we saw how emotional Ryan Spann was at his sort of post-event or mid-event media availability when the fight was scratched, right? He puts a lot into these camps. Everybody does, but this one was a lot of sacrifice for Ryan. Conversely, Nikita Krylov is the one that was dealing with an illness the day of that fight or leading into that fight. And so we don't know how much that took out of him to then be turning around 2-3 weeks later and jumping right back into the cage. This was a really compelling matchup when it was the main event. Now, I don't know. I would assume because it's now the third fight on the main card that we're back down to 3 rounds, which also changes the dynamic of this. It means if you're Ryan Spann and Nikita Krylov, you're not worried about, I've got to conserve some energy in case we get into the late stages of things. But this is an added wrinkle. Like, it was already a fascinating fight. This is now another added wrinkle to a fight that was already compelling, that's already going to carry some impact in the light heavyweight division, which feels kind of wide open again, right? We've got a new champion in Jamal Hill. We've got some space created. John Jones is officially gone. We don't have a shadow hanging over us. We can move in a new direction. And the winner of this one is going to move into a spot where they face a bigger name and a meaningful opponent next time out. Not that each other isn't meaningful here, but a more established name and somebody that's a little further ahead in the pecking order. So this one's intriguing to me. We shift to featherweight, Ricardo Ramos versus Austin Lingo. My question is, can Ramos build some consistency? He, for me, is the quintessential shows flashes guy, right? He comes out and you have a performance like last time against Danny Chavez where he lands the spinning back elbow and it's beautiful and it's set up. It's not a, heat of the moment split decision. Go and watch it back. He sets it up and he's done it before. He fakes the level change and then comes up and spins around, right? He reaches out and actually kind of taps Danny Chavez's knee while he's up against the cage and then spins back around and lands flush. And it's beautiful. It's brilliantly executed. One of the best knockouts from last year. Deserved more mention in the knockout of the year sort of conversations. But he's never won consecutive fights of 45. And he's only won back-to-back fights in the UFC, I think twice. Start of his career when he was down at bantamweight, and then again after his first loss at bantamweight, he won 2 more. This is one of those situations where if he's going to do anything, and I talk about this pretty well every week with somebody, if he's going to do anything and be anybody in this division, it needs to start this weekend. Because Austin Lingo, for all the success he's had recently, is a hittable, beatable guy for Ricardo Ramos, who could and probably should go out in style on him. But what he needs to do is do away with some of the dumb stuff that is ineffective, like the little back kick, and I'm doing it under my desk right now because I can't not do it when I talk about it. The little like kick around to the back of his front leg that doesn't do any damage, that isn't effective at all. It just looks interesting. And if Michael Bisping's on the call this weekend and he does it, Michael Bisping will absolutely rip him and understandably and rightfully so. But he needs to just come out and have a I'm better than this guy performance. This needs to be a fight to the level I'm capable of, not to the level of my opponent performance for Ramos. And I hope we see it because the flashes are really good. The raw materials, some of the pieces that are there are really good. And I want to see if he can build a little consistency in this division. Next up, the second of 5 bantamweight matchups. Said Nurmagomedov against Jonathan Martinez. My question is, where does Martinez stand in the bantamweight division? Which I understand is kind of a weird question for a guy that's won 4 straight, 6 of 7, 8 of 10, which really should be 9 of 10 because the Andre Ewell split decision is in there. But like, hear me out. I can't tell you what the best win is in there because none of them are, and I say this as always, with all due respect to the people that he's faced. So last time out, it's a leg kick TKO win over Cub Swanson, who is a 38, I think maybe even 39-year-old veteran moving down to bantamweight for the first time. Is it Frankie Saenz? Is it the ghost of Thomas Almeida? Like, as always, you can only beat the guys they put in front of you. And job one is to go out and win. And in his last 4, and for the majority of his last 10 fights, Jonathan Martinez has done that, and he deserves recognition and praise and a certain level of merit and status within the division for accomplishing that feat. Because as I say all the time, if winning 4, 5, 6, 8 fights in the UFC was easy, far more people would do it. He's clearly talented, but how talented? Because this is now a step up. Nurmagomedov is one of those guys, and we saw it especially in his last fight. Said Yakub Kakramanov was dominating that contest, out wrestling Nurmagomedov. And he made one mistake, and Said snatched up a ninja choke, got the finish, and kept moving forward. He's on a nice little winning streak as well. He's beaten some good competition. He's a little more established, certainly, than Jonathan Martinez is. So this is the test for Martinez to show I'm a top 15 guy, or just outside of the top 15, because I don't think Said has a number next to his name at this particular moment. This is the one, right? And this is a fight, the kind of fight that Jonathan Martinez has been deserving of for a couple of appearances now. And we'll talk about somebody later on who is in a similar position. But this is the one. If you're the real deal, if you're somebody that needs to be considered in that, not the top tier of the division, because I think all the way through the top 10, 15 really needs to be considered the top tier of the bantamweight division. It's that good. But even just in that second cut, in that second 15, this is the one you win. This is the one you go out and have success in. And so we'll see. Next up, light heavyweights Vitor Petrino against the pleasure man, Anton Turkai. My question is, will Petrino be the next Brazilian Dana White's Contender Series grad to make an impact? So he's 25 years old. He's undefeated. Protege of Cristiano Marcelo, formerly of Shoot the Box way back in the day. Ultimate Fighter Live contestant, CM Systems. We've had a couple pretty solid Brazilians come off of Contender Series in the last couple of years, right? Season 5 gave us Gelton Almeida, who I mentioned earlier, and Caio Bahaio. The All Brazilian Series, or 3 sets, gave us Alan Nascimento, who actually didn't make the UFC off the show. He lost his fight there, but was part of it. Thiago Moises, Johnny Walker, Marina Rodriguez, a bunch of very good fighters. This is a chance for the 25-year-old to come out and face a guy in Anton Turkai, who is now getting his thanks for doing us the favor fight, which is something that, you know, sort of always happened back in the Joe Silva days, continues to happen now, where you take a fight on short notice, you get thumped. He took a fight against Gelton Almeida, got thumped, UFC 279, I believe, last September, got beat, got choked out, and now he gets the, okay, we'll give you the step back in your actual division. Thanks for doing us the favor. Here's another opportunity. If Petrino is a guy, he wins this one, and he wins it going away. If he's somebody we need to pay attention to, this is a statement performance. And as I said earlier, talking about Krylov and Spann, light heavyweight is in that space again where there's room and opportunity for a young fighter, especially a 25-year-old, undefeated, to start putting together some wins and build a little bit of buzz and build a little bit of momentum. And if he can do it, and you have Brazilians in 3 divisions like that, Bahaio at middleweight, Petrino here, Almeida at heavyweight, that starts becoming the kind of thing you can build into a fight night card, starts to become the thing you can build into the 3 fights before the 2 title fights on a return pay-per-view next January, if we get that far. These are the things that I think about when I look at a fight like this, is can this kid be somebody that we have to get invested in? And can we see even just the starting pieces of that, the building blocks of that on Saturday? Move to the heavyweight division. Carl Williams versus Łukasz Brzeski. The question is, can either of these dudes be more than middling heavyweights? So, absolute worst case scenario, they're going to be part of the middle of the main card mafia, right? They're going to be part of that Jake Collier, Chase Sherman, Waldo Cortez Acosta. I stumble on it every time. I got to just call him WCA or just call him Waldo because I hang up on it every time because my brain doesn't process his name properly. Worst case, these guys will join that group for at least a couple of fights, right? This fight is on the main card, I believe. And if not, it's like the last fight of the prelims. But heavyweight is kind of blah right now. And I know that sounds weird because we just crowned a new champion last weekend in John Jones, and he's new to the division, and there's some intrigue in the Stipe Miocic fight. But it's just kind of blah, right? Because we've had too much sameness for so many years with trilogy fights between Miocic and DC, 2 fights between Miocic and Francis Ngannou, and then a year last year where we didn't have another championship fight, and the same kind of guys like Curtis Blades or like Volkov or like Jairzinho or Tom Aspinall have all just been through the churn, right? They've all had to hang around and fight each other and mix and match amongst themselves. Tai Tuivasa in there as well. Derek Lewis in there as well, to where all the matchups feel exhausted. Everything feels kind of worn out, save for this pending fight between Curtis Blades and Sergey Pavlovich. That's the last fresh sort of pairing that's there. And so it'll be really interesting to see if either one of these guys, who are both Contender Series grads, who are both going to get a look, right? Clearly, Łukasz Brzeski is getting a look. Won his fight on the Contender Series in the 3rd round to get a 3rd round stoppage win, pops hot, catches a 9-month suspension, still comes back, loses his debut, and he's still here, right? So he's had a bunch of strikes against him, just figuratively, not actual, like the UFC counts strikes against people. And yet he's still here, getting this opportunity to potentially derail another Contender Series guy. The division is in dire need of fresher names that are going to be more than just that mid-pack, middle of the main card mafia that I talked about. And the opportunities are going to be there for them, especially for Contender Series grads. So it'll be intriguing to see if one of these guys can go out and sort of understand and harness that and turn that into performance on Saturday. We move to another bantamweight matchup, Rafael Assunção versus Davy Grant. And my question is, can we take a moment and give these gentlemen their flowers? So they have a combined age of 77 years old, and they have 57 combined fights. For a number of years, the now 40-year-old Rafael Assunção was a top 10 fixture in this division. To me, he remains one of the most criminally underappreciated and underrated fighters of his era. When he moved to the bantamweight division, he went 11-1 in his first 12 fights. The one loss was to TJ Dillashaw at UFC 200. He had beaten TJ earlier. Somehow, despite all of that, 11-1, never got a title shot. Got put into some rematches, much like the Dillashaw rematch. Got rematched against Marlon Moraes, who he beat in Moraes' debut. Got put into that when he was again in a position where he could maybe move forward, coming off a win over Rob Font, could maybe move forward and get a championship opportunity. Loses that one. It's the start of a 4-fight slide. It just doesn't come around. Davy Grant fights in the finale of The Ultimate Fighter 17, first season with women, Juliana Pena, Ronda Rousey, loses to Chris Holdsworth, deals with myriad injuries, numbers of years away where we're not sure if he's ever really going to have a career. And he sort of pops up for a fight and then disappears with more injuries and then shows back up and then he's gone again. And it just feels like, man, just a hard luck situation for a really good dude, like a genuine, you root for Davy Grant kind of thing. And he's now put together this nice little career as a 37-year-old now, kind of veteran fixture in this division, just outside as part of that second 15, He's the guy you got to beat, right? Adrian Yanez had the test against him. He knocked out Louis Smolka last time out. They're both coming off wins. They are, as I have in my notes here, perfect ecosystem fighters. These are the kind of guys that every division needs, even if they're on the tail end of their career, even if they're on the backside of things, they're in the twilight. They're still dangerous. Each of them proved that last time out. Assunção snapped a 4-fight losing streak with a very good performance, a very nice win over Victor Henry, who is on this card as well. Davey Grant, as I said, knocked out Louis Smolka. Good win. And so I just think that these are the kinds of moments and these are the kinds of athletes that we need to take time to celebrate a little bit more. Because in this time where we're all understandably, or to a certain degree, understandably upset and in our feelings about all of the Contender Series people that are coming through and all of the young talent that's coming through and old talent that's getting moved out, let's show some love to the old talent before they get moved out. This is the last fight of Rafael Assunção's contract. I spoke to him on Monday. He told me that it's probably the last one, though he's not officially announcing it. He's not all the way out the door, but it's probably the last one. So let's give him the love that he deserves. Let's give Davey Grant the recognition for battling through all of those injuries and never giving up on this dream and getting to where he is now. Because in a couple of years, both these guys will be gone and people will forget about them. And they shouldn't. Because Rafael Assunção was one of the best bantamweights in the world for a good 6-7 years. And Davey Grant has been through a lot more than a bunch of people that get a whole lot more attention than him and have done less. And so we get this opportunity on Saturday to take a minute and give them their flowers. And I absolutely think we should. Move to the middleweight division. Cedrikus Dumas makes his debut against Josh Fremd. And my question is, when will the Josh Fremds of the world stop getting third chances? This is nothing against Josh Fremd. This is a Spencer thing more than anything else. But to me, when we're talking all the time about the bloat of these fight cards, and every card has 13, 14, 15 fights, and a bunch of them are guys that I would say even the moderate fans don't know, there comes a point to me where I want to see more of the people that are having success and more of the people that present some upside fighting more regularly. Now, look, a lot goes into that, certainly. But one of the things that can go into it of getting some of these intriguing athletes more opportunities is not giving the Josh Fremds of the world a third fight. He's 0-2 in the UFC, lost his debut in a not particularly entertaining fight, had some success in his sophomore fight against Tresean Gore before just getting his neck snatched up and getting put to sleep. Fine, great. Do we really need to see a third fight? Are we really sitting here thinking, man, it was just some bad luck, and now this guy that's been around for a little bit, trains at a good gym, been around the game a little bit, is suddenly going to piece it all together and become a meaningful member of the middleweight division? Now listen, I'm the guy that every week says not everything has to be big stakes, big ramifications. Sometimes you need there to be just fights. But like last weekend, that's what we have Julian Marquez and Marc-Andre Barriault for. I don't need it to be a bunch of Josh Fremds. I don't need it to be a bunch of, who's another name that I can pull here? I don't need it to be another Trey Ogden. If you're 0-2 in the UFC and you've been finished in both of those fights by people that aren't even showing necessarily a whole bunch of upside themselves, I don't think we need to see a third fight. And I don't say that to be harsh. I don't say that to be dismissive of Josh Fremd or others of that ilk. But like, the way to get the people that may have value long-term into the octagon and in front of eyeballs more often is to cull some of the roster to make way for greater opportunities for those men and women that are healthy, want to be active, and have upside. I understand that this is probably a little bit of a let's get Cedricus Dumas, who is coming off of Contender Series, who is undefeated, who has a little bit of an interesting style, and look to him and may be somebody that's going to latch on and that people are going to latch on to because of the style and performance that we've seen thus far. There's got to be somebody that's coming off a win in that lower end of the division that he could have been matched up with, rather than being put in there with a guy that's 0-2, most likely ends up 0-3, and then is never heard from again. Next up, back to bantamweight, Mario Batista versus Guido Canetti. My question is, when will Batista get the step up his efforts merit? He's the guy I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Jonathan Martinez. Similar sort of situations, right? Batista's won 3 straight, finishes in his last 2, choked out Benito Lopez on the main card, welcoming Benito Lopez back after like a 4-year absence last time out. And his reward, his return, is facing a 43-year-old Argentine who, has earned back-to-back victories. First round wins, good wins. But it's Chris Matinho and Randy Costa. And I'm sorry to the folks in New England that love those two gentlemen, that support those two gentlemen. They are just not UFC caliber fighters. We saw that with Costa. We saw it through 2 fights with Matinho. I know he's back on The Ultimate Fighter, and it's supposedly going to be different. Fine. Mario Batista has done enough for me in these last couple performances, which are Benito Lopez, Boom Kelleher, and Jay Perrin, to merit more than this, to merit something beyond Guido Canetti, who hasn't climbed out of this sort of lower third of the division yet. For all of the success he's had in his last 2 fights, he's still a below 500 fighter in the UFC. And Mario Batista is a 28, 29-year-old kid that is flashing some upside. So let's get him a shot. If he wins this weekend, and I think he should, and I think he will, because he has a more diverse arsenal, as long as he keeps that chin tucked, doesn't get clipped by something, I think he's able to get into the second, third rounds and really wear on and beat down Guido Canetti. Let's get him a step up. These are the sort of opportunities. These are the sort of guys that need those advancing opportunities, that need to be identified and given greater shots rather than just sticking through. This is the churn I talk about all the time, right? Why does Mario Batista need to win 5 fights or 6 fights before he's facing somebody of real substance? And again, none of this is ever said to diminish or disparage the guy across from him this weekend. So no offense to Guido Canetti, but why has Batista got to win a 4th straight against a guy like Canetti before getting that next opportunity, before getting that step up and a bigger kind of showcase fight? Why isn't he facing Davy Grant? I mean, Davy Grant jumps in on short notice. It's a change of opponents. Assunção was supposed to face Kyler Phillips, whatever. But why wasn't he booked against Davy Grant off the hop? Why wasn't he booked against Assunção? His teammate Kyler Phillips was, so fine, but sort of something of that, right? Like, it just feels like there are missed opportunities at times to hustle these guys forward, or just put a greater spotlight on them. Give them that test that gives them the opportunity to show that they deserve and merit and are capable of more, rather than them going through this progression of sameness where it's a half step or a lateral step instead of advancing. It's just me. Move to the flyweight division, Ariane Lipski versus JJ Aldrich. My question is, where does Lipski rank in terms of hyped rivals that have floundered? Because it hasn't been good. The Violence Queen was a thing in KSW. She was somebody we were all hyped up to see. We were all looking forward to this young, early 20s Brazilian who had been bashing people in Poland and in Europe, coming to the UFC and just making statements. I know I picked her early against Joanne Calderwood, now Joanne Wood. And it just it hasn't worked out at all. like at all. And so if we're going to do a list, and I'm not going to do it right here because I don't have it written out in front of me, but like she's got to be on that list. There's certainly been some people that were bigger names and more prestigious names initially coming in that didn't get to where you expected them to go. But she's got to be up there, right? And please hit me up on Twitter, hit me up in the comments section. Let me know who else is in that group for you, because I am actually interested, and I will do this myself this evening when I sit down, and I will put down a list for myself to see what names you guys come up with. But like, she had a ton of hype coming to the UFC and it just hasn't worked out. And this weekend, JJ Aldrich is just that perfect sort of knows who she is, meat and potatoes veteran that's going to go out and stick a jab in your face and then stick it in your face again and again and again. And if Lipsky hasn't fixed things, if Lipsky hasn't really taken big steps forward, she's going to catch another loss here. And it's probably going to be the end of her UFC run. And we're going to look back at it and be like, God, what the hell happened? Because she's another one, kind of like Sabina Mazo, deserves to be on that list, right? We're all pumped up. Looks great on the regional circuit. To me, they are both examples of shining on the regional circuit doesn't necessarily mean you're going to shine in the big stage. Shows you the difference between even looking great in a terrific promotion, like KSW, against good competition, fighters that were in or eventually got to the UFC, but it just hasn't been the same. And it's been really disappointing. Back to the bantamweight division for one last time. Victor Henry versus Tony Gravely. My question is, can Tony Gravely maintain his pattern? So the way his career has gone in the UFC is that he's 1-2 and lost 1. Then 1-2 and lost 1. And he's coming off a loss. I'm not a superstition guy. I'm not a patterns always hold true guy, although we have seen athletes go on longer stretches of never replicating results. Shout out to Randa Marcos. This is a tough one, though, because if Tony Gravely's going to maintain his pattern and get back into the win column, he's got to beat a guy in Victor Henry that's coming off a loss to Assunção, as we mentioned, but that looked very good in his debut last January against Raoni Barcelos, who moves well on the feet, is a good striker, is a good scrambler himself, a good wrestler himself, and sort of profiles to me as the kind of more fluid, better moving fighter that has success against the Tony Gravely's of the world. I like Gravely. He's a friend of the show. Ian has talked to him a bunch of times. He's a very good competitor. He is a perfect middle of this division competitor that is going to do exactly what he has done thus far in his UFC career. Win 2, lose 1. Win 3, lose 2. And just grind it out. It's not going to be championship. It's not going to be top 15, but there's utility to what he's done and what he is doing. I think that's the case for both of these guys. Now, Victor Henry is a little bit older because it took a number of years for him to finally get his UFC shot. This is a great fight really early on in the card. I'm going to write about the division for OSDB Sports this week. Check that out through the lens of this weekend's card with 5 fights and some of the other fights that are on the horizon, like Cheeto and Corey Sandhagen, and presumably Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo for the title. But this is a good one in this division to kick off a night where a lot is going to happen at bantamweight. We open in the flyweight division, Tyson Nam versus Bruno Silva. And my question is a simple one. Remember Bruno Silva? In 2021, he entered his fight in March with JP Bays on a 3-fight winless streak. So he lost his debut to Khalid Taha, who then popped, so it became a no contest. Lost his next 2 fights to David Dvorak and Tahir Ulembekov. And he sort of, up until that point, for me, was simply, hey, this is that guy that trains with Henry Cejudo, and that's why he's here and he's still getting another look. He goes out in that fight in March and absolutely wrecks JP Buys. 2 months later, he makes a really quick turnaround and goes out and in a minute blows through Victor Rodriguez. Now, you can certainly say those aren't big names, those aren't big established UFC. Fine. But as always, you can only beat the guys in front of you. And when you do it in impressive fashion, and the JP Buys fight was one-sided from the jump, and you dispatch a guy in 60 seconds, those things matter to me. They resonate with me. They get me interested. And now I'm sitting here almost 2 years later, and this guy's finally coming back. The thing that's really fascinating to me about it, and I wrote about this for Fighters on the Rise because I included Silva, is that there's no like paper trail of where he's been. There's no, articles that have been published about UFC flyweight Bruno Silva undergoes X surgery. Nothing on his IG about that. He's not a big IG guy. He's not a big Twitter guy. So it just sort of feels like he's taken the last almost 2 years, 22 months of just working on his game and doing other things. And he's had some seminars throughout Brazil, and he's been back and forth between Brazil and Arizona and different. And like now he's back. In May 2021, he felt to me like a guy that was starting to make a little run. And if he's got, Cejudo in his corner and that team at Fight Ready in his corner, the wrestling's on point. The hands look good in those two fights. And so maybe this is somebody that can go forward, but all of that momentum is lost now. He's basically, to me, starting back at zero. Now it's 2 straight wins. So that's a positive, right? Go out, you beat Tyson Nam on Saturday, and that gets you 3 and you go forward. But like, it's just weird to me. It's kind of just one of those, like, where have you been? I think I called him Kaiser Soze in Fighters on the Rise because like all of a sudden, poof, he was gone. He's back. We're going to find out whether he's back and ready to resume, kind of pick up where he left off, because Tyson Nam can crack. It's one thing he can do. He's going to come out there. He's going to be in great shape. May or may not make weight because he's struggled at 25 a couple of times, but he can crack. And if Bruno Silva can get through him, maybe he can be a person of interest again in this division. That's going to do it for the show. I'm Spencer Kyte. Follow me on Twitter at Spencer Kyte. Check out all the stuff that everybody here on this platform is putting out, both on the YouTube and the Patreon, SevereMMA.com/pints. Still early enough in the month that you are getting full value. It is always worth it. You should definitely check it out. Let me know in the comment section, one, who fits that list of hyped fighters that have floundered in the UFC, but also anything else you want to tell me. Appreciate you checking in. I appreciate you watching. We love you. We look forward to talking to you next week. See you later.